Hello, everyone. My name's Andrew Kramer, and sometimes people have like candy and they give it out to the audience to like audience participation, but I already ate all the candy, so we're just gonna try something else. We're gonna try something else. In fact, let's play a little video, wake you guys up a little bit after lunch. Thank you very much. So I'm a visual effects artist. I've been doing this for about 15 years. Can you believe it? And I'm a huge fan of movies. I love movies. You guys like movies? Right? And I've had a great opportunity to work on a lot of really fun projects and title sequences and films. But if you guys do visual effects or any kind of production work, you know it can be a lot of work, a lot of long hours, and you have to love what you do. And one of the things is, how do you balance that with your life? Like, how do you spend all your time dedicated to something? It's everything. Well, not too long ago, I got to tell you about something. My wife got pregnant. Oh, thank you. And we're actually going to be celebrating our 10-year anniversary in May, if you can believe that. So that'll be good, presumably in May. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. And also, you notice the stock photo walk here. It's a classic. By the way, we're doing... we hired a stock photographer to come just take our maternity pictures, save money, and look, now we're making some money. Adobe stock, it's great. You can pay me afterwards, Adobe. All right. Oh yeah, what was I talking about, right? What happens after you get pregnant? Well, of all the time I spent working on films and just like sleepless, crazy nights, and believe me, I loved it, and I still do. But, with Jason here, I just realized that, maybe there's more to life, and maybe there's more important things, At least that's what I thought until I got a chance to work on Star Wars. Right. So let's, all right. Okay, Star Wars, all right? This is like the movie that inspired me. I didn't even know what a visual effect was. It was just, wow, this movie is amazing. Look at all this cool stuff that's going on. And other movies that kind of inspired me. And the point is, you have to find your inspiration wherever you can find it. And it's classic, let's be honest. But it got me into visual effects. It got me into movies. And, one of the first projects I ever worked on was a lightsaber project. Maybe some of you guys started a lightsaber video. Anybody? Thought you were going to leave me hanging. That's great. In fact, I remember the first thing I did was in Photoshop. And I didn't even know how to use Photoshop. But I could draw a line. So I somehow managed to get a video clip into Premiere. And it was like 30 frames per second, right? No big deal, right? A couple seconds. That's like a million frames. So, calculator. And so I'm drawing a line on each one of these frames, making an animation, and let me just tell you, I never want to do that again. And that's why I became an After Effects artist instead of a Photoshop artist. The point is, finding one thing that you can do, and even if you don't know a program entirely, it's like get in there and just start doing one thing, and that's kind of what I did. Now, very recently, I had a chance to work on Star Wars: The Force Awakens, and as a huge fan, as I'm still kind of blown away that I had an opportunity to work on this film. And when you're getting the chance to do this, you have to think, well, I sure hope I don't screw this up. So let me show you the work that we did on Star Wars: The Force Awakens, and then we can talk about how we created it, some of the challenges, and some of the cool tips and tricks. You guys ready? All right. Look at this. I found a way to make videos full screen autoplay.
Come on!
Thank you, and a quick shout out to the Star Wars Hologram team. Jace Hansen is actually in the audience, good friend of mine, awesome designer, and we got Navarro Parker, Ryan Weber, and Dustin, and just awesome guys. Like, if you ever wanted to work on a Star Wars film with some of the biggest Star Wars fans, it was awesome. And a lot of Star Wars trivia, maybe too much trivia, late nights, too much trivia. All right, so the original Star Wars, 1977, right? Some guy's like, all right, that's right. It's almost like a period movie in a sense, because the look of the holograms and compared to, say, the modern aesthetic of holograms. So when we're doing like our research for how are we going to approach this, what is the design and the look that we're going to go for? Well, we went back to the original Star Wars: A New Hope, and we started analyzing all of the different graphics, the screen graphics, the characters, all of just the little details, so that when we created the holograms, it would have that same feel just like the original. So here's just a quick cut of some of the different screens. This video is about 45 minutes long. Here we go. So we can clap for Star Wars. Come on, everybody. I think one of the most innovative things that they did was they actually had screen graphics ready on the same day that they filmed. Has anyone ever done like a green screen replacement on like a TV screen with like a reflection? Anybody? Trust me, it's not fun. But if you just look at all this kind of stuff, just the language, it's just very crisp and clean. Everything just has a a very readability about it. You're watching the film, you just instantly understand all the graphics. And that was something that, the director, J.J. Abrams, it was a big part of just making sure that these graphics were clear and that the audience could see, hey, this is what the story is. This is what the audience needs to understand. And so, we took a lot of that, our lead from that original design work. So the thing about these holograms is that, one thing that you notice is that it's actually color. There's a little bit of color in it. And, there's the scan lines are actually vertical, and there's just a lot of little details that we wanted to try to capture. And whenever you're doing an analog type of effect, this sort of distortion effect, you need the right tools. You need to be able to have the technology to do it just right, because it's just a difficult thing. So what we did is we came up with some technology. Yeah, that was our team of researchers back at the lab doing a hell of a job. Okay, so let's take a look at one of these projects and talk about how we took those elements. So we filmed a ton of different analog VHS elements. We had different tapes, super VHS. There's all these different little details that come through. And once we captured all of those elements, we would go through and isolate various lines or various glitches that we liked that kind of felt like they had an interesting look to them, because we didn't want to just replicate the VHS look. We wanted to use it as a source for creating some really interesting patterns. So you can see here's one here, some other kind of pieces, and you can see we cut little strips of it out, isolated it, and then ran it through what amounts to a particle system to randomly populate them so that you would never have the same pattern. And the big thing that gave us the control of is not making the hologram so wild and uncontrollable. Like you want a scene to not be distracting and have some big glitch go across. So in the case of, you want to have bigger glitches, like in the when we see the Starkiller base, there's some thick stripes of digital glitches that went through that. And that was this element. You can kind of see some of these great blocky elements that pass through. And those are just little bits that we isolated. And so separating them just gave us the control to tone it down or increase it without having to rely on what we filmed originally. Now, another aspect of doing holograms is the scan lines, right? That's like the most important thing, right? Well, I don't know. So we're doing 3D holograms. You've seen the scene with Han Solo on the Millennium Falcon. By the way, I didn't tell this story yesterday, and maybe I'll tell it today. How about right now? So I'm working, it's days go by, right? And I must have been up for 2 days straight. Finishing, it was like the last crunch, and I was like, should I take a nap? But now I got to finish this shot for this review. And so I was like, I needed some coffee. So I went to the break room, and there was an espresso machine and a coffee machine. Someone was getting an espresso, and I was thinking, what do I want? Do I want an espresso or a coffee? So I'm standing there in this kind of daze. I'm just looking at the espresso machine thinking, and this guy turns around, and it's Harrison Ford dressed as Han Solo in full costume, and I'm just like, I think I'll have an espresso today. True story. Okay. So we're talking about scan lines, right? All of the scenes on the Millennium Falcon, the camera is moving around. It's 3D, so we have 3D objects, 3D lines, 3D details. So we needed our scan lines to be 3D. And if you think about what a scan line is, it's screen space, right? Well, what happens to the scan lines that go off in the distance? Do they get smaller as they're further away from the camera? And so we created basically a built-in method inside of Element 3D. And if I scroll down here, it's basically, it's called World Scanlines, and it actually gives you a real 3D look of scanlines as it breaks up all of the geometry. So it just made it very realistic on the shots where objects would come closer to the screen. Now, another cool thing we have here is you can see this light beam. Now, this seems like a pretty straightforward effect. Okay, light beam, hologram, right? You could use some kind of a radial blur or some type of that effect. But the problem is a radial blur doesn't have a distinct ending, right? It just goes past, it's just a random kind of blur. And how do you get it to basically suck into a point where it's being projected out of? So we actually created a tool called reverse radial that would bring the entire image. So instead of taking an image and projecting it out, we took an image and projected it down. And if you look closely, it matches perfectly with what the visual is, and it's almost like a volumetric kind of a light effect. And so figure that out. We didn't have to worry about cheating it for every shot and having to worry about the edges not lining up with the visuals. Now, one other cool thing is that if I play this back, let's see if we can play this back here. You can actually see a little bit of a noise pattern running through this. And so what we did is we used that same VHS texture and projected it in world space onto the geometry. So not only do you have the VHS and the scan lines in 3D space, but you're actually projecting it around the volume. So look right here, you see how it kind of dips down as it goes through the line right here. So it helps to shape the geometry and just give it some more dimension. So that's, on top of the obvious stuff like adding the displacement back on and giving it really that kind of degraded visual look. This was like the baseline of all of our different experiments and tests to get just the right hologram look. All right. Another thing, I'll just talk on this briefly. I didn't get a chance to talk about this yesterday. And it just basically, the design and layout of the original sequence. So I've done some title sequences in the past, and some people on Video Copilot, they said, hey, are you doing the title sequence? Are you designing the title sequence for Star Wars? I was like, what are you talking about? It's already done. It's been done. There's no need to design it. There's no redoing that, right? So our goal instead was, how do we recreate it and make it look like the original, and down to as many little details as we could possibly get to. In fact, Jace Hansen was, he did the layout for the Star Wars logo to match every little crink and cut from the original film, because, hey, it's Star Wars, right? That was what we said every time. They're like, oh, we need to work on this detail. And it's like, oh, we got so much to do. Yeah, okay, well, it's only Star Wars. And then someone's, all right, we'll do it. Another thing is that matching the perspective, right? Matching the lens distortion, chromatic aberration, and giving it just a little bit of that film gate weave, because there's just something about, if it's just too perfect, it's, okay, you're looking at a digital graphic, but there's just something about the originals, and we wanted to do our best to try to match that. So, you guys, I'm not going to spoil the movie, so I'll just close that. That's fine. All right, let's take a look at another really cool technique that we used on Star Wars. Okay, so when you have holograms that are luminescent, how much time do we have? 45 minutes over. So how do we get the holograms to reflect off of the different objects and different things in the scene? So it helps if you have a 3D object of the things you want. So are you guys familiar with a matte shadow? It's a 3D term that kind of refers to a special type of material that allows you to cast shadow from a 3D object onto a live action plate. So if you got like a city shot and you want something a 3D object to cast a shadow onto the building and onto the ground, you use what's called a matte shadow. Well, similarly, we use a technique like a matte reflection. So here I actually have just a screenshot from the trailer of BB-8, and we have a model that's pretty good and matches the overall geometry. And with this model, and I'm just using Element 3D here, and you can see just move it around at the compositing level, is I managed to basically create a reflection-only matte. So if we take a look at this, you can see that it's just the reflection of the hologram. So let me check this out. So all your holograms, and you notice too that we're using the physical shader system. So you have very reflective on the glass, and you have nice diffused grunge around the different areas. So if you have a model already set up, you can do this really easy. Now here is the key, and the tricky part is we had a team of 3D camera trackers that would take scene data, lens distortion data, and be able to track any object perfectly, like down to the pixel. So we would say, oh, hey, guys, hey, yeah, I like that shirt. So listen, we need you to track BB-8's head in the shot where he kind of like wobbles forward and does all this stuff. Like, so cool. Like, you think like 2 o'clock this afternoon? Every time. They were on the money with that. All right. So in the case of the BB-8 head, we would actually get back a scene file that would be perfectly tracked, and then we could just do this effect. We'd put the model in the scene, and then all of our holograms would just reflect off of his head and off of any of the objects in the scene that we wanted. So sometimes it's okay, you could do a little trick here and there, maybe an eyeball reflection is simple enough, but with a character who's so close to the camera and you want to be able to create a volume of reflection, it just was a lot more realistic to have an actual source. Okay. Now, one more thing about our workflow. So here is the Starkiller base hologram, and just going to take a look at this. Let's load this up really quick. So there's a ton of details here, and one of the keys is we needed to be able to animate all of the parts animating on from nothing. So we needed to be able to control the core, we need to be able to control the tags, we need to be able to control the sides so that whatever scene we wanted to composite it into, we would have all of the details available. So if I jump inside of Element here, you can see I've got different groups set up for the different objects, and that gives you the ability to control them individually, animate them individually, and this gave us a very, very fast real-time workflow inside of After Effects. We could move the camera, we could give the compositors the ability to change the 3D scene based on what they needed. So sometimes the challenge of compositing is that you don't have access to that original 3D scene or that file, and you're stuck with an angle that you wish maybe was just a little bit to the side, or there's this one little particle or object that is just distracting to that point of view, and the ability to be able to just move it just enough. Another case, we've got these dimensional tags, and you can see they're all screen space, and as the camera moves around. One thing that came up was in the Starkiller base scene where they're all standing around a circular hologram, sometimes a tag might be in front of one of the main actors' faces, or it would just be a distracting position. So you could just go in, click on one of those tags, and you could just move it around and put it right into the position that you needed. So it was a really handy workflow that I know the compositors got a lot of good use out of it. Now the other cool thing is we designed most of the holograms inside of Cinema 4D. So if you're a Cinema 4D user, the integration with Element 3D, with After Effects, is very seamless, even down to the point, if I were to say take this object, I could actually right-click on it, edit original, just like in After Effects, and it opens up the scene in Cinema 4D. So if you need to make some changes, create some additional material IDs, or you realize that some details aren't coming through quite right, you can go back in and adjust it, and you're continuing to work. So it's a really, really cool workflow that we found to be critical to being able to get as many shots done as we had and in the time, and make sure that they were, Star Wars. So you had to keep it up. So there we go. So this is the work we did on Star Wars. A little bit about my company, Video Copilot. We do tutorials and training for people. Some of you guys may know about it. And one of the things we like to do is show people what's possible inside of After Effects. And so recently we came out with a plugin. So That's a free plugin. Thank you. And if you guys have the Creative Cloud and you're not an After Effects user, you have After Effects. And you can download that plugin. There's other tutorials, other things that could get you started. And sometimes you can look at all the things that you can do in After Effects, and it can be overwhelming. But if you can just find one thing that you might want to try to do, like maybe a lightsaber, maybe an energy beam, maybe a title, just open it up and focus on that one thing. And if that enhances your workflow with, say, if you're an editor or even a graphic designer, you'll just be able to do that much more stuff, and then you're one step closer to pushing your skills to that next level. So I encourage you guys to do that. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm Andrew Kramer, and we'll see you next time.